ABC General Hospital spoilers reveal that what makes Sidwell truly dangerous is not his temper or his ambition, but his patience. He does not expand his dark operations in visible explosions. He does it in quiet adjustments, subtle substitutions, careful manipulations that only reveal their devastation when it is too late to reverse them. Recently, his focus has sharpened, his reach widening beyond financial leverage and political intimidation into something far more intimate and sinister. He has begun to understand that power is not only about control of institutions, but control of people at their most vulnerable. And in that calculation, Drew has become the perfect target. Willow, entangled in Sidwell's orbit, believes she is participating in strategic counterattacks, in necessary strikes meant to secure stability and protection. She convinces herself that escalating pressure is a defensive move, that forcing certain outcomes is the only way to survive the larger war around them. But what she fails to see, or perhaps refuses to confront, is that Sidwell's definition of more does not stop at influence. It extends to biological interference, to rewriting the very chemistry of a person's body if it ensures dominance. If Sidwell is truly prepared to switch Drew's medication, the implications are catastrophic. Medication is trust in physical form. It is a promise that what you swallow will stabilize rather than sabotage. To tamper with that promise is to invade the last safe boundary of a person's autonomy. The side effects would not announce themselves dramatically at first. They would creep in unexplained fatigue, sharper mood swings, cognitive fog, irritability that feels disproportionate and yet impossible to control. Drew, already under strain from political scrutiny and emotional fractures, would begin to doubt himself. Is he overreacting? Is he unraveling? The brilliance of Sidwell's potential plan lies in its invisibility. No one immediately suspects poison when the symptoms mimic stress. No one calls it sabotage when a man in power appears simply overwhelmed. And as the effects intensify, accelerated heart rate, paranoia, lapses in concentration, Drew's public image begins to crack. Speeches falter. Meetings derail. Allies question his stability. Opponents circle like sharks sensing blood in the water. Willow, watching from too close to the center, feels the tremors but misinterprets them. She believes external pressure is crushing Drew, unaware that the source may be internal and engineered. Sidwell feeds her partial truths, suggesting that Drew's instability proves he was never strong enough to hold his position, that the world is correcting itself. In doing so, Sidwell deepens not only his operational reach but his psychological grip. The tragedy unfolding is layered. Drew fighting symptoms he cannot name, Willow aligning herself with a strategy she thinks is protective, and Sidwell orchestrating a disaster that will look like natural collapse. If the dosage shift accelerates the side effects, the timeline compresses. What might have taken months now unfolds in weeks. Insomnia sharpens into hallucination-like flashes. Confidence erodes into defensive aggression. The public narrative shifts from respect to concern to whispered speculation, and here is where the true obsession emerges. Sidwell does not merely want Drew weakened, he wants him rewritten. He wants the version of Drew that once stood firm to dissolve into someone erratic, unreliable, easier to discredit, and ultimately replace. This is not a random act of cruelty. It is a calculated dismantling of identity. The most chilling aspect is how plausible it appears. Stress is a convenient explanation. Political tension is a believable cause. Even Willow, if confronted with mounting evidence, might struggle to reconcile the possibility that someone she trusted enough to strategize beside would cross the line into pharmaceutical sabotage. Yet Sidwell's expanding darkness suggests he no longer sees lines at all. Each successful manipulation emboldens him. Each secret he buries becomes proof that he can alter reality without consequence. That is the obsession forming at the center of this arc, the belief that he is untouchable because his crimes leave no fingerprints, only symptoms. The impending catastrophe is not just medical, it is relational. If Drew begins acting out of character, trust erodes. Friends pull back. Allies distance themselves. Willow's loyalty fractures under confusion and guilt. And when the truth finally begins to surface, perhaps through a misplaced prescription, a suspicious pharmacy report, or a pattern too precise to ignore the explosion, will not be quiet. It will be seismic. Because once it becomes clear that the deterioration was engineered, the narrative shifts from weakness to victimization, from incompetence to conspiracy. Sidwell's ambition, once admired for its strategic brilliance, will be exposed as predatory obsession, and that revelation will not simply threaten his plans, it will threaten his survival. The disaster looming is twofold. Drew's body and mind pushed to dangerous extremes, and Sidwell's illusion of control shattering under the weight of exposure. What began as an adjustment to medication becomes a symbol of something far more corrosive, the willingness to invade another human being's biology for power. In that sense, Sidwell is no longer just expanding his operations. He is crossing into territory that transforms him from manipulator to architect of collapse. And the moment Willow realizes that her pursuit of more enabled this escalation, the emotional fallout may be just as devastating as the physical one. Because obsession, once unleashed, rarely limits itself to one victim. Sidwell no longer thinks in terms of small corrections or quiet manipulations. He thinks in eradication. What began as subtle adjustments, whispers in the right ears, pressure applied in private rooms, strategic interference masked as coincidence, has evolved into something far more aggressive. He wants to eliminate every obstacle, every unpredictable variable that threatens his expanding control. And in this tightening spiral of ambition, Drew has become the most dangerous liability of all. Drew represents resistance, moral stubbornness, and the inconvenient ability to endure. Sidwell understands that as long as Drew remains steady, there will always be a force pushing back against the darker architecture he is building. That realization shifts Sidwell's strategy from containment to destruction. The danger surrounding Drew is no longer abstract. It is immediate, physical, psychological. The side effects of manipulated medication, the increasing pressure from political and personal fronts, the isolation created by engineered misunderstandings, all of it converges into a perfect storm. Drew begins to feel the instability creeping into his own body. His thoughts become slower, then sharper in the wrong ways. His patience thins. His instincts feel unreliable. The most terrifying part is not the symptoms themselves, but the doubt they create. When a man cannot trust his own mind, he becomes vulnerable in ways that are almost impossible to defend against. Sidwell counts on that vulnerability. He counts on Drew imploding quietly, on allies stepping back, on the narrative forming that Drew simply could not handle the weight placed on him. But the story does not collapse the way Sidwell expects, because Kai sees what others overlook. Kai has always existed slightly outside the main battlefield, observing rather than dominating. That distance gives him clarity. He notices patterns in Drew's decline that do not align with stress alone. He sees the precision in the deterioration, the unnatural acceleration of symptoms, the way every setback seems timed. Where others see weakness, Kai sees orchestration. And that perception becomes the turning point. If Kai steps forward to investigate, perhaps tracing prescriptions, confronting inconsistencies, connecting fragments that others dismissed, he becomes the unexpected force that interrupts Sidwell's design. The rescue does not have to be dramatic in the physical sense. It can be intellectual, strategic, exposing the manipulation before it becomes irreversible. In that moment, Kai shifts from bystander to catalyst. This intervention changes the psychological landscape entirely. Drew, who was teetering on the edge of collapse, suddenly realizes his unraveling may not be his own fault. That spark of clarity reignites something inside him: anger, determination, survival instinct. Sidwell's obsession begins to crack under scrutiny. And Willow, still orbiting Sidwell's increasingly erratic plans, starts to see the widening gap between what she thought they were building and what he is actually becoming. What she once rationalized as bold strategy now looks disturbingly reckless. Each new adjustment Sidwell proposes feels less like defense and more like compulsion. He is no longer merely protecting power, he is chasing control at any cost. The shift proves something crucial. Obsession does not stabilize ambition, it distorts it. Sidwell's need to eliminate Drew has pushed him into exposure. His calculated expansions are morphing into frantic escalations. The more he tightens his grip, the more visible the cracks become. Willow, drawn deeper into his orbit, finds herself complicit in actions she can no longer fully justify. She senses the volatility rising, the way Sidwell reacts too quickly, plans too aggressively, dismisses risk too easily. Their partnership, once presented as visionary, now feels combustible, and that is where everything begins to explode. Drew's survival disrupts Sidwell's narrative. Kai's intervention introduces an unpredictable variable. Willow's growing doubt weakens the unity Sidwell depends on. The system Sidwell constructed through manipulation starts feeding back into itself, turning pressure into instability. What he intended as a final adjustment becomes the trigger for exposure. The danger is no longer confined to Drew's health, it spreads outward, threatening reputations, alliances, even freedom. In this evolving storm, the most powerful transformation may not be Drew's recovery, but the shift in perception. Sidwell is no longer the unseen strategist, adjusting outcomes from the shadows. He is becoming the man whose obsession made him careless. And once that perception takes hold, control begins slipping in ways even he cannot recalibrate. The explosion is not just external conflict. It is the collapse of the illusion that he could redesign reality without consequence. If Willow is ultimately the one who falls, the story shifts from strategy to devastation. Her collapse would not feel like a calculated defeat. It would feel like the moment the entire structure she believed in caves in on top of her. For weeks, she has walked the line between justification and denial, convincing herself that every aggressive move alongside Sidwell was necessary, that pressure and escalation were tools for survival. But when the consequences finally arrive, they do not arrive gently. They arrive with blood on the floor and silence in the air. Kai's death is the breaking point. It is not supposed to happen this way. Kai was never meant to be a casualty. He was the one variable Sidwell underestimated, the quiet observer who saw too much and asked the wrong questions. When confirmation of his death spreads through Port Charles, it does not land as rumor, it lands as shock. There is no ambiguity, no hopeful twist. The loss is final, and that finality detonates everything. For Drew, Kai's death is more than grief. It is guilt sharpened into resolve. Kai stepped forward to protect him, to expose the manipulation, to interrupt a carefully engineered collapse. If Drew survives because Kai intervened, then Kai's death becomes a sacrifice. That weight changes Drew. It strips away hesitation. The man who was once destabilized by chemical interference and psychological pressure now stands anchored by loss. Grief hardens him. It clarifies his enemy. For Willow, the devastation is even more complex. She cannot escape the fact that her alignment with Sidwell contributed to the chain reaction. Even if she did not pull a trigger, even if she never explicitly ordered harm, she stood too close to the fire. Kai's death becomes the undeniable proof that the path she chose was poisoned from the start. The realization crushes her. It forces her to confront the moral erosion she ignored. She wanted control. She wanted leverage. She wanted to strike first. Now she has blood on her conscience. Sidwell, however, reacts differently. Where others see tragedy, he sees disruption. Kai's death was not necessarily planned in this exact form, but in Sidwell's worldview, casualties are collateral damage in the pursuit of dominance. The difference now is exposure. A death draws attention. It pulls investigations into places he preferred to keep dark. It transforms quiet sabotage into potential criminal inquiry. The disaster is not only emotional, it is structural. Alliances shift. Questions multiply. Willow's loyalty fractures under grief. Drew's resilience strengthens under anger. And Sidwell, for the first time, feels pressure he cannot fully anticipate. What makes this arc explosive is the way Kai's death rewrites motivations. Drew no longer fights for survival, he fights for justice. Willow no longer rationalizes escalation, she wrestles with remorse. Sidwell no longer moves invisibly, he moves under suspicion. The emotional landscape changes overnight. Conversations become interrogations. Partnerships become liabilities. Silence becomes dangerous. And the greatest catastrophe may not be the death itself, but what it awakens. Kai's absence becomes a presence in every room. It lingers in Drew's determination, in Willow's tears, in the tightening scrutiny around Sidwell's operations. The narrative of control collapses into one of accountability. If proof begins to surface that Kai was targeted because he uncovered too much, then the explosion will not be contained to private grief. It will become public outrage. Port Charles thrives on secrets, but a confirmed death tied to hidden manipulation threatens to expose everything. And once exposure begins, it does not stop at one crime. It spreads. It connects dots. It pulls threads. Willow may be emotionally destroyed. Drew may be physically and psychologically scarred. But Sidwell's empire, built on calculated adjustments and invisible sabotage, now stands on unstable ground. Because obsession can engineer decline, but it cannot control the aftermath of a martyr. Kai's death is not the end of the war. It is the spark that ensures the next phase will not be quiet.